Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
You are now listening to Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Every month, Cultural Survival brings you the latest news impacting indigenous peoples across the globe. This bulletin features important news stories from North, Central, and South America, Africa, and Asia. Starting news from Australia. Reconciliation Week in Australia takes place from May 27th to June 3rd, marking two important dates for First Nations rights. With this year's theme being No More Than Ever, Australians are encouraged to come together and address issues disproportionately affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Quote from Reconciliation Australia's website reads, quote, "Reconciliation supporters must stand up to defend and uphold the rights of First Nation peoples, to call out racism wherever we encounter it, and to actively reinforce the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across this continent," in quotes. Now, news from Africa. In Namibia, following the discovery of unmarked grapes and artifacts related to the Herero and Nama genocides, Namibian authorities are being urged to halt plans to expand a port on Sark Island. Between 1905 and 1907, the German Empire used the island as a concentration camp, where Nama and Herero people were executed, forced into labor, and imprisoned. The authorities want to expand the port on the peninsula's south coast to support green hydrogen production, and researchers are suggesting that they stop because there is a risk of human remains being found in the waters nearby. In Kenya, survivors of alleged atrocities committed by British Army Training Unit members in Samburu County told a parliamentary committee investigating the crimes that they had been scarred permanently by sexual abuse. Women members of Samburu people, an ancient Kenyan tribe, alleged that they are now mothers of children who have been burned as a result of the sexual encounters that they suffered at the hands of members of the British Army Training Unit. The victims are pleading for a rapid process, which they hope will ultimately lead to justice being served on the perpetrators. The news from Asia. In Bangladesh, the Human Rights Forum Bangladesh, comprising 20 organizations led by Dr. Hamida Hossain, Advocate Sultana Kamal, and Raja Devashish Ray, urged the government to avoid persecuting civilians in operations against the Kuki-Chin National Front. The forum expressed concerns over reports of harassment of regular citizens, particularly targeting the Bam and other indigenous communities in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. They highlighted that Kuki-Chin National Front's criminal activities, including recent bank attacks and abductions, prompted these operations. However, security forces have been accused of detaining, harassing, and arbitrarily arresting civilians, including minors, with only a few having links to the Kuki-Chin National Front. Restriction on movements, reduced mobile network speeds, and limits on essential goods like rice have aggravated local fears. The forum emphasized the need to protect the rights and safety of indigenous peoples during such operations. In the Philippines, indigenous residents of the Dalicano village in the northern Philippines have strongly opposed Itugong Suek Resources Inc.'s plan to mine gold in their area, citing insufficient consultation and potential environmental harm. Despite initial rejections in 2022, Itugong Suek Resources Inc. secured an agreement in 2023 through the National Commissions on Indigenous Peoples, but villagers claim they were not properly informed. Elders like Domek Leita fear water contamination and land destabilizations, reflecting past mining disasters. The Dalinko Indigenous Peoples Organizations alleges irregularities in the consultation process and has petitioned for nullification of the agreement. They argue that the mining companies' promises of development and employment do not outweigh the risks to their ancestral lands and traditional practices. The National Commission on Indigenous Peoples approval remains pending due to documentation issues, and local resistance continues amid fears of cultural and environmental degradations. News from Indonesia. Indigenous activists from Ayu and Moi peoples of Tanah Papua conducted traditional ceremonies at Indonesia's Supreme Court in Jakarta, urging the court to protect their ancestral lands from palm oil companies. They performed rituals and dances symbolizing their connection to the land, which is threatened by palm oil plantations. The Supreme Court is reviewing appeals to revoke permits for 4 palm oil companies which endanger vast areas of Ayu and Moi customary forests. Hendrikus Frankie Oro, an Ayu leader, challenged a Malaysian-owned company's plan to clear extensive West Papuan forest, a case initially rejected by lower courts. The Ayu also faced setbacks in legal battles against 2 other companies. Now Supreme Court is their last resort. Similarly, the Moi community is appealing to protect their forest in Sorong district. Their forest, essential for the livelihoods and cultural heritage, also play a crucial role in climate regulations. Activists urge public support for their struggle against environmental destruction. In Malaysia, the secret National Conservation Agreement, signed on October 28, 2021 by the Sabah State Government and Hots Standard Private Limited, has drawn significant criticism for its potential harmful impact on indigenous peoples in Sabah, Malaysia. The National Conservation Agreement grants Hots Standard Private Limited commercial rights over 2 million hectares of Sabah's forest for carbon trading and other natural capital exploitation for 100 years. This agreement, shrouded in secrecy, violates indigenous people's rights by commodifying ancestral lands without their consent. Indigenous communities were excluded from decision-making processes, contradicting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Malaysia supports. The agreement also lacks transparency and due diligence, raising legal and ethical concerns. Critics, including indigenous leaders and NGOs, emphasize that this deal threatens the well-being, land access, and cultural heritage of indigenous peoples, urging its annulment to protect their rights and environmental integrity of future generations. Now moving to Guatemala. On International Day of Action for Women's Health, young Chorti women spoke out to demand that local government bodies prioritize women's sexual and reproductive rights. These spokeswomen especially called on the Community Development Councils and Municipal Council, the Departmental Development Council, the Governor's Office, and the national government to integrate these rights into their official plans. Their demands come despite the fact that the women make up over half, 51.2% of the Guatemala's population. However, they argue that women continue to be left behind when it comes to development, equality, and respect for their fundamental rights. The young women further criticized the community development councils for neglecting the issues faced by adolescent girls and women in their communities. They highlighted the under-reporting of rape and violence against women, urging for better support systems. In Ecuador, the iconic Galapagos Island face a growing threat: plastic pollution. Images of sea turtles choked by plastic debris, sea lions entangled in fishing nets, and hermit crabs using plastic bottle caps as shells paint a grim picture. The problem originates far from the islands themselves. Over 1,000 kilometers away, in Quito's San Pedro River, a special barrier traps plastic waste before it reaches the ocean. This plastic, car parts, computer components, bags, and bottles would otherwise be carried by current to the Pacific Ocean and ultimately the Galapagos Islands. While some plastic comes from distant sources like Peru and Chinese fishing vessels dumping west at sea. Worryingly, 40% originates from mainland Ecuador itself, carried by rivers to the islands. This highlights the importance of tackling plastic pollution at its source. Cleaning up Ecuador's river is crucial to protect the incomparable wildlife of the Galapagos. In Peru's Amazonian indigenous leaders are calling on the governments for urgent action. The Inter-Ethnic Association for Development of the Peruvian Jungle is demanding protections measures following threats and killing of community leaders. Inter-Ethnic Association for the Development of Peruvian Jungle Vice President Miguel Guimaras, who heads the organization's Indigenous Defenders Program, emphasized the importance of bringing intentions to these cases. Quote, "If the murders are not acknowledged," he said, "there will be no progress towards justice for the victims' families." Unquote. This plea comes amid a rise in violence within indigenous territories. At least 50 indigenous representatives gathered in Lima, the capital, for the second meeting of indigenous defenders. The meeting addressed the ongoing threats, with leaders highlighting that 34 community leaders have been killed since 2013 for opposing illegal activities on their lands. In Chile, Hector Laitul, a prominent leader of Mapuche indigenous group in Chile, was sentenced to 23 years in prison by the World Court of Temuco. Temuco is located south of the capital, Santiago. Laitul led the Arauco Majeco Coordinating Committee, an organization advocating for Mapuche autonomy and opposing colonialism, capitalism, and current Chilean systems. He was convicted of violent land seizures, theft of wood, and assaulting authorities. Fearing potential violence in response to the verdict, Chilean authorities reportedly issued a raid alert for the regions surrounding the courthouse. That is all for this edition of Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Stay tuned for our next broadcast. For more information on the rights of indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook and Twitter.